Carole Lieberman. All comments, views, and opinions are solely those of Dr. Lieberman, her guests, and callers. Now it's time to have a seat on Dr. Carole's couch. Here's your host, Dr. Carole Lieberman.
And welcome to today's edition of Dr. Carole's Couch. I'm your psychiatrist host, Dr. Carole Lieberman. Well, today I have a very exciting show for you with a very exciting guest, Judge Ginger Lerner-Wren, and she has just written a book that, this is so timely because there is such a problem, an increasing problem of people with mental illness ending up in court and getting years of jail and prison and worse, when really what they've needed is mental health treatment all along that they never got. There are many when you look at people who have committed crimes, typically school shootings, but not just that. There is such a pattern in their background, and one of the parts of the puzzle includes that there is some untreated or poorly treated kind of mental illness that was there, for a long time before they committed whatever the crime was. And of course, it's sad for the victims, tragic for the victims of the crimes, but it's also sad for the person who, had they been treated appropriately, wouldn't have wound up in that situation to begin with. Well, that's why it gives me great pleasure to have as a guest Judge Ginger Lerner-Wren today, because she actually was the first person to develop a court in her court in Florida, taking it on herself to develop the first mental health court. And her new book is called A Court of Refuge, Stories from the Bench of America's First Mental Health Court. So welcome to the show, Judge Lerner-Wren.
Thank you, Dr. Lieberman, and it's a real honor, first of all, to have a seat on your couch.
Thank you.
I just can't tell you what a thrill it is, first of all, to meet you and to have this wonderful opportunity to talk about a court of refuge and to talk about all of these issues, which really are so poignant. I think that, vexing, if you will, throughout the entire nation. So thank you for having me.
Well, you're welcome. Before we get into the actual court, the beginnings of this court, which actually began, you were appointed in 97, right?
That's correct. I ran for office, for judicial office, and I was appointed I have two courts, actually. I'm a county court judge in the 17th Judicial Circuit of Florida, which is Broward County, and I think that many of your listeners may be familiar with Broward County. We just suffered such a horrible tragedy at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, and our community, of course, is really grieving. And the courthouse, just to give your audience some perspective, the courthouse is actually about 20 minutes away from Parkland, and it sits in the city of Fort Lauderdale.
Yes, I've been there. Yes, and of course, an incredible tragedy that is having huge repercussions. Of course, it's interesting and tragic that today, you must have heard there was a school shooting in Maryland as well.
I did. It's just we are in the midst of how many terrible epidemics can we be in the midst of, at one time, between the opioid epidemic and the escalating rate of suicide, of course. I also sit on the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention, and with this gun violence. So there's a lot to talk about on the couch.
Yes. Well, before we get into that, what I'm interested in is how you, like when you were a little girl, I always do this. When you were a little girl,
yeah, I think
when you were a little girl, you
fascinating.
didn't know that there would be such a thing as a mental health court. So
no, I didn't. Of course, I didn't. I don't think that even when I, well, it's interesting. When we started the court, of course, we didn't know it hadn't been done before. I don't think our community even ever thought about that. But when I was going back to your question, when I was a little girl, I knew I always wanted to do some kind of civil rights work, and that was something that I knew very, very early. And I think that my trajectory in my legal career, which was very, very unusual, I feel, led me perfectly to be the one assigned to this unique and specialized problem-solving court.
So at some point, so you became a lawyer because of wanting to do some kind of civil work? I mean, was that what drew you to law? And then my question is, what made you curious or interested in mental health?
Yes, that's a great question. So I've always had a very, as you indicated, repeated that I was very interested in civil rights work. I'm very, very interested really in, I guess, in really helping my community and making the world a better place, because those are the values of my family. And when I became a lawyer, actually, and I don't know if people go through this, in other areas, but I really couldn't find the right fit. I was looking for a more humanistic kind of legal practice, and I was trying to get into more of a public interest slot, if you will, in the legal career. I couldn't find it. And finally, a position arose where I was appointed to head what's called an Office of Public Guardianship. And you may be familiar with guardianship in your role as a forensic psychologist and psychologist generally. And that was for adults where the probate court found individuals incapacitated and in need of guardians. And the people that I served in my program were indigent and had all kinds of disabilities, including serious, persistent mental illnesses and maybe suffering from dementia and Alzheimer's disease, etc. And I really began to get very, very interested not only in mental health, but understanding that there was such a scarcity of resources in my community that so many families were in crisis.
And did you have any, did you during college or after college, did you take any courses in, you probably took Psych 101 in college, I presume, but did you?
Actually, I didn't. I was a poli-sci major. Back then, everybody going to law school was told, you have to major in political science.
Yes.
And I did. I took a few, social science, obviously, related courses, but I think it was that particular position involving, believe it or not, 3 particular families that came to my office basically within 10 days of each other. They were all desperate to find help for their mother or their son or their daughter. And each family, ironically, this is very, very strange, ironically used exactly the same language or words. And they said, kind of mysteriously, someone told me you can help my mother, or someone told me you can help my son. And, obviously that couldn't have been really correct, because this program was for people who had no relatives. And we were alone. But yet I was so taken by what they were going through in their plight to try to find mental health treatment and services for their loved ones that, since we're on the couch, I guess I can say this, that, I made, what, if you will, like a private, pledge that if I ever had the opportunity to help these families, I would. And within 3 weeks, I received a call from an attorney friend of mine saying that there was a new position involving mental health. It was a very, a very controversial new position, but it was also highly responsible. And the person looking to hire somebody had heard me speak and was interested in whether or not I might be interested in that job. And of course, I had already made that pledge, so you know what my answer was.
Wow. The universe bringing it to you. Yes, ask, believe, receive, and all of that.
Correct. If you listen to those whispers, correct?
Yes.
And so I spent, that job really was the linchpin to my training for what would ultimately be the first mental health court in the United States, because I was hired to oversee the implementation of a pretty unusual consent decree in a federal class action centering on our state psychiatric hospital that was located in Broward County, but it literally served almost the lower half of the state of Florida. It ended up being an amazing training ground for me. I served the plaintiffs in this role for Florida's, what is now Disability Rights Florida, and we had incredible experts that trained me in everything from person-centered psychiatric rehabilitation to systems of care, to, all kinds of innovations in mental health services and disability rights law. So it was a very, very important role for me.
Well, and illnesses like schizophrenia and manic depressive illness?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And so
the class members that I served in the state hospital that was under the federal class action consent decree. I mean, the residents of this state hospital. This is back now in the that class action started actually in the late 80s. It settled basically in the mid 90s, and you could imagine that there was virtually every kind of cognitive or psychiatric disability and mental illness, including traumatic brain injuries and developmental disabilities, that we call intellectual disabilities now, of course, that resided in that institution literally for decades.
And so it was a class action against the hospital because of the lack of good treatment.
Yes, exactly. It was for lack of providing basic care, lack of proper mental health treatment, rehabilitation. It really was one of those institutional impact cases.
Uh-huh. Well, it's kind of ironic, though, that then you got into the position of presiding over this court because, maybe, I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I've done, as a psychiatrist, I trained at NYU Bellevue, first of all.
Oh, fantastic.
And as part, I was chief resident in the final year. And as part of that, that involved training psychiatric residents at Manhattan State Hospital. Mm-hmm. And then when I came out to California, I consulted for one of the state hospitals here. So I have a lot of experience. Some of my experience is includes working at state hospitals. And although, yes, a lot of state hospitals, it's not like, it's not as well equipped as some private institutions and so on. But I think that the doing away with state hospitals, pretty much nationwide, I mean, certainly cutting down, if not doing away with altogether, has resulted in a lot more people on the streets creating the kinds of crimes that I imagine you see in your court.
Well, I think a couple of things. First of all, I think that my service, coming from the disability rights sphere, in that regard, obviously my job, I was also 50%, my role as a PAMI lawyer, that's the Protection and Advocacy for Individuals with Mental Illness Act, which is, of course, a federal law. And, my job was basically to investigate abuse and neglect of individuals that were institutionalized in all kinds of facilities, not simply, not just state hospitals, of course. Could be nursing homes or ALFs, that type of thing. But my view is, I think, a little broader in terms of really studying, and I think in the Court of Refuge, actually, it does a pretty reasonable job, of talking about, what happened, if you will, at the time when President Kennedy had such a vision for the 1963 Community Mental Health Act. And then, of course, within a month after the passage or the signing of that legislation, of course, he was assassinated. And, that vision, if you will, of community-based mental health care just simply never came to fruition.
Right.
And it still has not come to fruition,
right, in
my view, because of literally centuries of historic stigma and discrimination surrounding mental health. And, of course, as a forensic psychiatrist and in my role as a long-time, mental health advocate, we know that recovery is real and treatment works.
Yes, absolutely. And yes, it was a great idea, the community mental health, but the problem is no one really followed through. There were no funds and so on to follow, and no structure to follow through. Well, we need to take a break. My guest is Judge Ginger Lerner-Wren. Her book is called A Court of Refuge, Stories from the Bench of America's First Mental Health Court. And when we come back, we will hear some of those stories. You're listening to Dr. Carol's Couch, and I'm your psychiatrist host, Dr. Carole Lieberman.
Ask the experts. Call toll-free right now, 1-866-472-5787. And ask our All-Star team to answer your question. That's 1-866-472-5787.
Thank you for calling.
VoiceAmerica.com.
Are you having difficulty coping with these troubled times? Do you want help? Then contact Dr. Carole Lieberman today at www.drcarole.com. Dr. Carole is a certified psychiatrist who not only has won an Emmy, but is a regular on top television shows like Oprah Winfrey and Larry King. She's here to help you through books, CDs, and helplines. Having trouble relaxing? Check out her relaxation CD. Has the fear of terrorism crippled your life? Call the terrorism hotline. And if you're having trouble with relationships, check out her book, Bad Boys. Dr. Carole wants to help you today, so contact her at www.drcarole.com or for immediate help at 1-900-860-COPE. Get help making sense of these troubled times. www.drcarole.com.
These days, everyone is looking for information on staying young, healthy, and fit. The Voice America Health and Wellness Network is here to help you on your quest to better health and a better you. We talk about everything from diet, fitness, and aging to substance abuse, personal growth, mental health, and much more. Learn from our experts who cover health and wellness from traditional and holistic perspectives. Tune in to the Voice America Health and Wellness Network. Healthy living starts here.
Stimulating talk.
It gets those synapses in the brain firing really fast.
All the time. The #1 Internet talk station where your opinion counts. VoiceAmerica.com.
Welcome back to Dr. Carol's Couch. If you have a question or comment for Dr. Carole, dial toll-free at 1-866-472-5788. Now back to the show. Here's Dr. Carole Lieberman.
And welcome back to Dr. Carol's Couch. I'm your psychiatrist host, Dr. Carole Lieberman, here with a really interesting guest, Judge Ginger Lerner-Wren. Did your mother watch, what was the show?
Gilligan's Island. Is that what you're going to say?
What?
Gilligan's Island?
Yes. Is that how she picked your name?
Actually, I'm a little, I wish I'm a little older than that. You know, I always asked her about that name. It was great for running for office because I ran with the greatest little ice-spiced gingerbread cookies. But it's an unusual name. I think it's a Rose.
Ah, okay. Well, yes. It's a great name. I just wondered if that was from, that was the inspiration. Well,
no.
Judge Ginger Lerner-Wren is the author of a new book called A Court of Refuge, Stories from the Bench of America's First Mental Health Court. And so tell us about, well, first of all, how it evolved from being an offshoot of the criminal division of your court held during lunch hour without any money, and how do people get referred to your court, and tell us all about it.
Sure. I'll give you, I could take a week. I don't have that. But, I'm so proud of my community because it really was a number of precipitating problems that led to the creation of the court. It led to a grand jury investigation of our community-based mental health system, but largely because of a high-profile case, a criminal case, involving a young man actually with traumatic brain injury by the name of Aaron Wynn. And Aaron Wynn became the catalyst for this court after he was released from a forensic psychiatric hospital after suffering a motorcycle accident that left him very seriously disabled with brain injury. One thing led to another, and he had a negative encounter with a police officer, ultimately, as you know, found incompetent to stand trial. And according to medical records, Aaron Wynn literally spent 2.5 years in 4- and 5-point restraints in a Florida forensic hospital. And when he was released, and his family lived in Broward County, a very, upper middle class family, again, could not find help or services for their son. Aaron's condition had worsened. He had a panic attack at a grocery store, ran out, and tragically collided with an 85-year-old woman who fell to the pavement and sustained head injuries, which she died from, and Aaron had been charged with murder.
Oh, wow.
It was his public defender, Broward County's now public defender, Howard Finkelstein, who led the charge, if you will, for a grand jury investigation, and then a task force ultimately came to the idea of starting a specialized mental health court because they wanted to do something to try to streamline people that were being arrested in our local jails, largely as a result of offenses, minor quality of life types of offenses, because they could not access care. And we really had what I talk about as a very incredible collaborative effort of shared vision that we just wanted to take a stand against the criminalization of people being arrested with mental illnesses, and the court was just our community's leap of faith.
Wow, that's so. And so, what happened after he inadvertently killed that woman?
What ultimately happened is that he was committed to a private brain injury institute in Florida, the only one for individuals with traumatic brain injury, after his family actually sued the state of Florida for civil rights violations on a civil matter. And the case ultimately, of course, transitioned into that commitment. So that's what happened ultimately to Aaron Wynn. He's still there. The book is dedicated to Aaron Wynn and his courageous family who endured so much. And to me, they really symbolize, the need for our nation to really invest and prioritize mental health in America.
Yes, more than ever. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. So in other words, if he hadn't been treated so inhumanely for the time that he was strapped in restraints for all those years, I mean, I don't know what they were thinking of, just releasing somebody from that kind of situation just out into society. I'm thinking that he didn't need more help.
Look, I hate to say this, but that is not uncommon, that kind of inhumane treatment. If you go and you read Human Rights Watch's Ill-Equipped and it's Callous and Cruel and all the other surveys involving human rights violations and disability rights matters involving persons with mental illnesses, the maltreatment is not uncommon. The criminalization, I've always said that the criminalization of people with mental illnesses largely is a matter of human rights, and the mental health court in Broward County is considered, quite frankly, a human rights strategy.
So how do people get referred to your court?
People, first of all, it is a misdemeanor court. All nonviolent misdemeanor offenses up to a year in jail. And we really created a very, very consumer-friendly, if you will, referral process. Anybody could make a referral to the court by calling my office. We have a rapid docketing system because we understood and understand that people that are entering our criminal justice system are often in need of acute psychiatric stabilization and treatment. So from a hierarchy, if you will, of values and needs, we were really looking to find and intercept individuals that we knew were coming into the court system, the criminal justice system, who in fact easily could have been and should have been diverted into the civil community-based system of care.
Yes, so
the court is what's called a problem-solving court. It is not a trial court. It is a voluntary treatment-oriented court, and it draws, some similarities from our very popular drug court model in the United States, and we apply a law reform science called therapeutic jurisprudence that really, if you will, kind of realigns court process to allow for individuals to have voice, to tell their stories, and to, be able to really interact and relate to the court so we can build trust and connectivity and really be able to promote engagement in care.
So tell us some of the stories. What are some of the cases that touched your heart the most?
Oh, thank you. Well, I will be, I guess, a little spoiler, in terms of the book, which includes a composite of so many cases. We've had over 20,000 individuals diverted out of Broward County jails, by the way, through Broward's mental health court.
Wow.
We get no money. I think I told you that. We were the model for the American Law Enforcement and Mental Health Project Act in 2000. That seeded and piloted other mental health courts. And I think one of my favorite stories, I just saw her in my court yesterday, involves a woman, she's a community case manager, but many years ago she was she found herself living on the streets as a result of a very emotionally upsetting divorce situation where she literally just really could not manage all of what was happening in terms of the distress in her life, and she believes now that she actually had some unidentified mental health problems, and she lost her children, and after that she felt if she didn't have her children, she didn't need her beautiful, 4-bedroom home, and she literally walked out and remained homeless until she found herself arrested on a petty theft charge for stealing, of all things, 5 harmonicas from a novelty store in a South Florida mall. And she was homeless and in jail, and she found herself in mental health court in the early years and was very, very motivated to get her children back. And her name is Catherine.
Yes, and so what?
And I think Catherine's story is not unique in the sense that, she realized that life was spinning, if you will, really out of control, and she thought she could manage, all of this distress, and one thing led to another, and she had a break. She had a psychiatric breakdown, and she ultimately got referred to the mental health court. At the time, we referred her to our own homeless facility that supported the court, and she's very fortunate. She was able to spend almost a year at a residential treatment facility, being able to work on managing her health. She ended up being diagnosed with bipolar disorder and then returned to college, and she's been working as a community mental health case manager for one of our local treatment providers for 15 years now.
Wow. Well, that's a great story.
It is a great story, and, there's so many stories like that where either people, just don't know what to do, or families do not know where to go for help when they see or realize that, something is happening in their family, whether it's their son or their daughter or a husband or a wife, and they really need help with everything from health literacy to navigation of systems, and to really understand that there's hope for recovery for people with mental health conditions. Mm-hmm. And that's what the court provides.
So would people like that lady or other people who need mental health services, who pays for these after you decide in the court that what should be? Do you?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, because we already indicated that we don't have any funding, but our community collaborative, all the mental health providers and human social service providers in our community really came together, and they wanted to serve this court, which took a lot, because it meant they had to realign their services in order to serve a population of individuals in the jail that, quite frankly, even though they may have been serving them the week before, they were very siloed. And we really had to break these silos down in order to form a more seamless collaborative. And, in order to divert people out of jail, we need to have a high level of coordination, transportation, and integration,
right,
between all of these agencies across an entire county. It's an incredible leadership feat. Not to, pat myself or anybody on the back, but it really is something to be able to coordinate that kind of integrated system of care between a criminal justice system and a community system. So I really think it's the will of a community to lead change.
So are you saying that individual therapists and hospitals and clinics are donating services to the court?
Yes. Meaning, I don't know if donating is the right word, but they are serving them, correct? And it's because we're taking individuals out of the jail and linking. We're making these linkages. I have a clinician. I have a fabulous licensed clinical social worker that I literally found at the state hospital and recruited for this role in the court. She's been with me now for 19 years. Her name is Janice Blendon. She is embedded in the court, and we do all of our clinical screening, assessment, triage, and problem solving right in the court. We really wanted everything to be out in the open, the good, the bad, the ugly, the joyful, and it's really quite an amazing court process to watch.
So, but so in other words, they come to the court and she does an evaluation of them right there or makes an appointment? Or
Yeah, she does. She'll do screening right in the court. We start to develop treatment. She'll start to develop treatment planning based on their needs and preferences, of course, right in the courtroom, and then we coordinate, care, and they will be released. To go ahead and start their care coordination process to engage in care. Mm-hmm.
So you were saying that it's not that these mental health professionals or the hospitals or whatever donate, but who are they being paid by?
Meaning they're part of the public funding safety net.
I see.
And if people do have insurance, or some of our people, have Medicaid or Medicare or managed care, we just basically use our existing community resources as best we could, and we centralize them through the court process.
I see. Well, yes, it must have taken, and it must continue to take, a huge amount of coordination, absolutely, because people just get lost, They wander out into the street.
We have to be we're very, very tight on our tracking, and, we really, we want to make sure, not so much, people have a misconception of the court, I think, and one reason I wrote the book, Carole, is I wrote the book because, we think about compliance and accountability, and oftentimes people think, people don't want care, and there's this, I think, a relatively false view that people don't engage.
Yes.
But the truth of the matter is, when you take the time, when you're strength-focused, when you really, convey that kind of compassion and passion for people's health care.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
You're talking about it from a medical science vantage point to reduce stigma. You'd be surprised. I mean, engagement is really, the big, I think, enchilada in mental health. And when people want care and are willing to receive care, you really see people just soar in terms of their recovery.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we can talk a little bit more about that and some other stories when we come back. My guest is Judge Ginger Lerner-Wren. We're talking about her book and her court. The book is called Court of Refuge, Stories from the Bench of America's First Mental Health Court, and that is in Broward County, Florida. So stay tuned. You're listening to Dr. Carole's Couch, and I'm your psychiatrist host, Dr. Carole Lieberman.
Ask the experts. Call toll-free right now, 1-866-472-5787. And ask our All-Star team to answer your question. That's 1-866-472-5787.
Thank you for calling.
VoiceAmerica.com.
Are you having difficulty coping with these troubled times? Do you want help? Then contact Dr. Carole Lieberman today at www.drcarole.com. Dr. Carole is a certified psychiatrist who not only has won an Emmy, but is a regular on top television shows like Oprah Winfrey and Larry King. She's here to help you through books, CDs, and helplines. Having trouble relaxing? Check out her relaxation CD. Has the fear of terrorism crippled your life? Call the terrorism hotline. And if you're having trouble with relationships, check out her book, Bad Boys. Dr. Carole wants to help you today, so contact her at www.drcarole.com or for immediate help at 1-900-860-COPE. Get help making sense of these troubled times. www.drcarole.com.
Follow the Voice America Talk Radio Network on Twitter. We're at Voice America TRN. You'll get the latest fix on what's happening with our shows, this week's featured guests, and general happenings that you should know about at the Voice America Talk Radio Network. Now you don't have to miss anything when you're away from your home or office. Just go to twitter.com/Voice America TRN. Or follow along with us at Voice America TRN, the Voice America Talk Radio Network. We're on the cutting edge of social media. Can you keep up?
Streaming live, the leader in Internet talk radio, voiceamerica.com.
Welcome back to Dr. Carole's Couch. If you have a question or comment for Dr. Carole, dial toll-free at 1-866-472-5788. Now back to the show. Here's Dr. Carole Lieberman.
And welcome back to Dr. Carole's Couch. I'm your psychiatrist host, Dr. Carole Lieberman, talking with my guest, Judge Ginger Lerner-Wren. She is the author of a new book called A Court of Refuge, Stories from the Bench of America's First Mental Health Court. And we've been talking about that. Is there anything, I don't know why, I was saying actually before we started the show, I was telling Judge Lerner-Wren that even though I've been a psychiatric expert witness for over 20 years, I haven't come across, and working on cases nationwide, I haven't come across a court like hers. And I guess maybe one reason, now that you've been explaining it, one reason is because you don't have psychiatric expert witnesses in your court because it's not really a trial.
That's correct. It's a problem-solving treatment court. That's correct. So the forensic, for example, the only reason we've ever had forensic psychologists and psychologists in our court is when they're actually faculty members, bringing in their class. Like the great Dr. Lenore Walker, who headed our forensic psychology division for Nova Southeastern University, where I'm also an adjunct, and I'm going to see a class, students tomorrow, Thursday morning in the court, because it is quite a teaching model, and there will be another forensic psychologist coming who's also an educator. So that's kind of the intersection there, but you're right. We're not putting anybody on the stand to make evidentiary types of determinations from that vantage point.
Well, you were saying that there are, in fact, that you have spawned, yours was the first, but there are now other such courts that have been popping up. But are you happy with the number that there are? Are you frustrated that there aren't more? Or are you hoping your book will maybe generate more courts?
Well, that's such a fascinating question. I was very young when I first came to the bench. It was over 20 years ago. I was in my mid-30s back then, and I think I was also pretty, I guess if you said, Judge Wren, what is one of your greater weaknesses? I think it's my naivete and optimism. I felt so outraged as a young lawyer hearing about the trend of the criminalization of people with mental illness. I just could not imagine that people were being jailed as a result of a medical illness. I still cannot fathom that, and that is largely the case. 1 out of every 3, inmate in America's jails has some kind of serious and persistent mental illness. And so when we started the court, and I really felt that the public would share that outrage, and all of a sudden, there'd be this tipping point, and a movement to really start investing and prioritizing in community mental health care.
Yeah.
Instead, there was a tipping point. There was a movement, and the movement was really more so from a backdoor vantage point, and that was to create more mental health courts and also the springboard, which is veterans courts, and all kinds of hybrid models of behavioral health collaborative courts that are all across the United States, including California. And now, of course, it's a global model. In 2013, the court was honored at The Hague in the Netherlands as the social justice sustainable model. And it really, this court model actually fits very, very well into courts in Europe and in undeveloped countries as a result of the fact that it doesn't take a lot in terms of revenue streams to bring this court into fruition, if you will, but it does take collaboration and will of service providers. So that's an interesting facet of the court, but I really felt, and I still feel, that the answers are not necessarily these kinds of courts, although there are judges and attorneys and prosecutors, all over the United States doing good work and trying to create pathways to mental health care and break arrest cycles. But I really do think the answer is to prioritize a public health model of behavioral health in the United States that really does enhance access to quality care.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, what has happened is that the jails and the prisons have become the state hospitals, except for the fact that they don't provide, the same kind of treatment that's focused on mental.
Yeah, it's hardly a recovery-oriented setting.
Right. And you probably know this, that there is a big shortage in these jails are dying for forensic psychiatrists and psychologists to work in the jails, because that's not, it's so funny. Well, it's not funny, but I guess odd that on these job descriptions, that part of it is that you wear a mask. Do you know about this?
No.
That they force yes. There's a whole list of things that you would be doing, the kind of work you'd be doing, and so on. And they talk about how you would be provided with like a mask, like a gas mask, something that prevents germs from coming in, and also protection, like
you like universal protection in healthcare?
No, I mean like physical, God, I forget what you call it, like some kind of, not an armored suit exactly, but in other words, to wear a mask and wear protective gear.
Well, I don't know why anybody would want to go and into those conditions and work like that. I've not heard of that. No.
Yes, well, maybe it's just California. I don't know, but yes, it's not very encouraging and plus you have to know not just psychiatry or psychology, but you have to know how to not let prisoners escape.
Wow.
You have to be able to somehow
not
stop
exactly the kind of helping profession that people are thinking about.
Prevent them from escaping. So yes, this is a huge problem. I mean, getting back to why I think there should be a resurgence of the state hospitals, obviously, to be more helping oriented than some of them were, or to be upgraded.
Well, I don't know. I think, respectfully, I disagree. I do think we need hospitals like we need hospitals. I mean, if we're really going to be serious about integrated care and patient safety and all of that, and building up our continuum of care, then it makes sense. I mean, we need longer-term hospitals. We need shorter-term hospitals. We need, urgent care centers for people with behavioral health. I don't know why, health is health. And so I think that historically, the record, if you will, is well set. That these types of institutions are rife with abuse and neglect, and they're really not healthcare driven or recovery driven. I think that we actually know what works in mental health, and that it's really a question of our policymakers having the will, to prioritize behavioral health in our communities.
Well, yes, there have been some of those abuses in the past in some places, absolutely, but it doesn't mean that future places have to have the same kinds of problems. And for certain, mental illnesses, it's really, and when the person doesn't have a family who is able to help them, or the person has been violent at home, or has other problems at home, and so the family doesn't want to keep them or keep close relations with them, which is always very sad. But there are a lot of situations where we were kind of what we were talking about before, where you have to sort of keep close tabs on people. Not everyone can survive in the kinds of, especially since there aren't enough.
That's true. I think that's true, but I am very much more aligned, with more of a public health approach. So I think we'll just have to, I agree with you to a certain point, of course, but largely we've never really had the capacity to scale of what we need in terms of community-based care. And I think that, for example, across the country, the National Association of Counties and the Council of State Governments and the American Psychiatric Association, is supporting the reduction, obviously, of individuals in correctional settings and promoting strategies for pathways and access to community care. And I really think that early intervention is very, very important. And if we really start talking about that and talking about children's mental health, and there's a new standard of practice now that all youth is going to be universally screened now for depression through the Pediatrics Academy of Association. I think that's so important.
Yes. Yes. I mean, that's one of the, everybody's jumping to the conclusion of banning guns as the total solution or the only solution for, school shootings. And really, a lot more important is screening for kids when they're in elementary school and middle school, and not just for depression, but, all kinds of other, hallucinations and all kinds of other mental problems. And these people, if they are kind of like, if they're put into treatment soon enough, these kinds of things could be avoided. Like what they, certainly as an example again, Nicholas Cruz gave warning signs since when he, certainly in elementary school already, there were warning signs, and he is not alone. Many other people.
No, of course, no, not at all. And I'm, I was very pleased to see, for example, I don't know if you saw, the 60 Minutes episode a couple weeks ago with Oprah Winfrey talking about the ACE study, the impact of adverse childhood experiences and trauma. And while, of course, it's an older, it's one of our longest now, largest studies from the CDC and Kaiser Permanente with regards to adverse childhood experiences, that information really does need to get down to every household.
Yes, absolutely, yes. It's not really a new invention or a new. I mean, I guess unfortunately, most people don't really know about it. But yes, the idea of adverse childhood events, the more that you have, the more likely you are to suffer a severe mental illness or to get into all kinds of troubles where they might end up
or have medical conditions. And I think that the idea of all of these strategies, Carole, that I think about and that I am optimistic about, if you kind of put all the pieces together with these schools, for example, that are adopting more of a restorative justice approach in their schools, are very, very optimistic to me in terms of promoting resilience in our children.
Yes, there are a lot of things that our children need to become more resilient about. One of them, of course, is terrorism. And I just wrote a book called Lions and Tigers and Terrorists, Oh My, How to Protect Your Child in a Time of Terror. That's for kids to learn about terrorism. So, but let's talk about, remind people of your book, which is A Court of Refuge, Stories from the Bench of America's First Mental Health Court. Well, I certainly hope that all of this really does help to promote what you're doing, get more people to know about it, and get more counties to do the same kind of court that you're doing. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for giving me space on your couch.
You're very welcome.
And I appreciate it, and I appreciate the work that you're doing and the promotion of mental health and wellness and safety for our children that you're doing through your work. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening. You've been listening to Dr. Carole's Couch, and I'm your psychiatrist host, Dr. Carole Lieberman.
Thank you for joining us on Dr. Carole's Couch. Join us next week at 1 p.m. Pacific Time for another installment of Dr. Carole's Couch. We'll save you a seat.